Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to dive into something really fascinating. How something as simple as printing books could actually lead to massive changes in society. New ideas and even revolutions.
Now, that might sound like a strange question, right? I mean, how can just a book, a few pieces of paper with words on them, lead to something as big as overthrowing a king? Well, that's the big question we're going to explore together today. So let's get started. So, where does our story begin? It all starts with this kind of intellectual spark that really lit up Europe back in the 17th and 18th centuries. And this new way of thinking had a name, the Enlightenment. Okay, so what does that actually mean, in simple terms? Well, it meant that people started to think, hey, maybe we shouldn't just accept things because that's how they've always been done, or just because someone tells us to believe it. Instead, they believed that by using their own minds, using logic and reason, they could understand the world around them and even figure out how to make it better. Now, you have to understand, this was a huge shift in thinking. For centuries and centuries, people were just expected to follow the rules, to listen to the authorities, without ever questioning them. But now, during the Enlightenment, the most important thing you could do was to ask, why? You had these thinkers, people like Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and they were spreading some really, well, for that time, some very radical ideas. They argued that we should be guided by reason, not just by old customs. And they began to question the absolute power of kings, and even challenge the authority of the church. Believe me, back then, these were some seriously revolutionary thoughts.
But here's the thing. An idea, no matter how great, is only powerful if it can spread, right? And this is where technology steps onto the stage and plays a huge role. The printing press, it became like an engine, taking all these new ideas and just spreading them everywhere, far and wide.
I mean, just look at this number. By the 16th century, you had something like 200 million printed books flooding the markets in Europe. 200 million! This was a total game changer compared to the old days, when every single book had to be copied by hand, which took forever. So you can see the effect of the printing press was quite simple, but profound. Before the printing press, books were really expensive and very rare. But suddenly, knowledge wasn't just for the very rich or for the clergy anymore. It started becoming available to merchants, to students, and over time, even to more ordinary people. And people at the time, they knew something big was happening. Just listen to this quote from an 18th century novelist. He said, "The printing press is the most powerful engine of progress," and that public opinion would sweep despotism away. So they saw print as this incredible force that could actually challenge powerful rulers. All right, so now you have millions of books, pamphlets, and newspapers all circulating around. And because of this, something new and really important starts to happen. A public sphere begins to form, a space where people could share and debate ideas. Let's take a closer look at how this developed. See, before print became common, most people were part of what we call a hearing public. That means information came to them by listening. Someone would read a text aloud in the village square, for instance. But print created a reading public. Now people could read for themselves, in their own time, and that meant they could think for themselves and form their own opinions. So where were all these discussions happening? Where did this new reading public gather? Well, new kinds of social spaces started popping up. People would gather in coffee houses, in salons, even in local pubs and taverns. They would read the latest pamphlets or newspapers, and then they would talk about them, debate. And this is a really important point. It wasn't just about people reading silently by themselves. It was about creating this whole new culture of dialogue and debate. For the very first time, you had large groups of people publicly questioning, well, everything, from science and religion all the way to how their government was run. Now, as you can probably guess, once people get into the habit of questioning everything, it's not long before they start questioning the people at the very top. And that's when print really became a kind of weapon. Writers started using books and pamphlets to directly attack the two biggest powers of the day, the church and the state, the absolute monarchy. They made arguments that the authority of these institutions wasn't necessarily from God, and that often their power was unjust.
This cartoon here is a perfect example of how they got their message across. If you look closely, you can see the common person, the ordinary citizen, being literally crushed by the weight of the nobility and the clergy. And images like this were so powerful because even if you couldn't read the words, you could understand the message immediately. The message was clear: this system is unfair.
And it wasn't just cartoons. A lot of, let's call it, underground literature started to circulate as well. These were stories and pictures that mocked the royalty, that made fun of the king and queen, and questioned their personal morality. And all of this started to chip away at the respect people had for the monarchy. It created a lot of anger, a lot of hostile feelings towards the rulers.
So, you have these new Enlightenment ideas spreading everywhere. You have this new culture of public debate, and you have growing criticism of the monarchy. All of this is building up, and it leads us directly to one of the most important events in all of world history, the French Revolution. So, how exactly did print help create the conditions for a revolution? Well, most historians point to three main ways. First, it popularized all those Enlightenment ideas we talked about, the ones that said society should be based on reason. Second, it created a new culture of dialogue, a public that was now used to questioning authority. And third, it spread all that literature that mocked the monarchy and showed everyone how unjust society was. This made people really angry. But we need to be a little bit careful here. Can we say that print caused the revolution all on its own? Well, not exactly. It's a bit more complicated than that. You have to remember, people didn't just blindly believe everything they read. They were also seeing a lot of propaganda from the other side, from the church and the monarchy. So, a better way to look at it is this. Print didn't directly force them to revolt, but, and this is the key, it opened up the possibility of thinking differently. So what's the most crucial point to take away from all of this? It's that print wasn't the only cause of these big changes, but it was absolutely a fundamental one. It gave people the tools, new ideas, new words, a new way to see the world around them in a more critical way. It created a new climate of thought, a climate where something like a revolution went from being unimaginable to being thinkable.
And of course, the story doesn't just stop there. This explosion of reading in the 18th century really just set the stage for even more changes to come. So it leaves us with a really interesting question: what happened next? What happened in the 19th century when reading became even more common, reaching children, women, and the working classes? That's something we'll explore later. Thank you for joining me today.